Bismillah. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to everyone out there. I'm going to take the time in a moment today to discuss this book here that I've been translating over the last month or so. And I found very, very interesting themes inside here. First, I want to show my respect and honor to the late elder Amadou Hampate Ba. May Allah be pleased with them. I read in an interview where he said that he thinks in Peul and then he translates into French. And anybody who does a translation work appreciates the effort that it takes to translate concepts and ideas from one language to another. And no one could be more thorough in telling the story of the Peul, as they say, Contes, initiatiques. Peul, some say Peul. I prefer Peul because Peul is the French version of Peulot. So when he tells this story, he is most qualified to tell the story because he thinks in the Fulbe language, the Peul language. And so he could find the correct terminology in French to translate this particular concept. What I also want to give him respect for is the type of prose. In the Fulani language, when they tell a story, they tell it like in a rhythmic prose, and sometimes they sing it, and so he had to find the French words in order to put this story into prose when he translated it into Contes initiatiques, which means the story or the origin of the Fulbe people. The other thing I want to recognize now is that the different concepts. When I was reading the history of the Bible, there's one book that says that questions who wrote the Bible because there are contradictions in the stories, and you have to look at the area where the Bible was revealed. A Bible just means book, but the revelation of God was revealed in that Afro-Asiatic area of East Africa and Arabia. And they have a great oral tradition. And that's the type of oral tradition that's here that he puts into the French language and he puts it into writing, which is a great treasure, as Amadou Hampate Ba said, that every time an elder dies, it's as if a library is being burnt. So because a lot of that knowledge usually goes with them if they don't put it into writing. So, this is really a gold mine because this is our heritage. This is our, what they call mythology, put into written form. But going back to the biblical accounts, they say that the Bible is composed of the stories of the Hebrew people. So when you have this oral tradition being translated into written form, you're going to come with contradictions because, if you go to the north of Arabia or you go to East Africa, the story is going to be slightly different when you go from place to place. It's not going to be exactly the same. So when they put the Bible together, they took these different oral traditions and they put them together. Now, like in the Bible, the Fulbe people are shepherds. And that's why a lot of the European scholars believe that these are the Bani Israel because, of the shepherd. The shepherd is the highest in the Fulani echelon. There are a lot of Selo Fulani, but they all look up to the shepherd people and to the nomadic people and see them as the purest of the Fulbe people, of the Fulani people. Such it is inside of the biblical accounts, the Bible accounts. For instance, in this story when the Roy, the king, was interested, peace out to Black Leroy, Leroy Baylor, me and him have done many interviews together. And I just want to say I found out what your name means in French, Leroy. Leroy means the king. And so when the king wants to know what's happening, he goes to these shepherds. And he gathers the shepherds and another group who are higher than the shepherd called the Silly Tagis. But these shepherds are the ones who he looks to for guidance, the king. And in the biblical accounts, it's the same thing. When Jesus was born, the angels didn't go straight to Mary in the biblical account. In the Quranic account, the angel talks directly to Mary. But in the biblical account, the angels first go to the shepherds and then reveals to the shepherds. And then the shepherds go and they hurry and they go and tell what the angels have revealed. So this hierarchy of shepherds is all throughout the Fulbe theme and the Fulbe history and origin. Amadou Hampate Ba, just like history, and what's interesting, when we use the word mythology in American terminology is generally meant as, as a lie. Somebody says you're telling a myth. But the real meaning of the word is the story of a people. Myth means a story of a people. And, with today's technology, the mythology of this book is verified in so many ways. For instance, Amadou Hampate Ba puts the origin of the Fulbe people in the East or in the Arabian Peninsula. It could be Egypt, it could be Ethiopia, it could be any of those East African countries. And, before we migrated over to West Africa. So that could be verified by DNA today because most Fulbe people, when you take the DNA, it has, traces of East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. So a myth is the story of a people. And so it's not necessarily mean it's a tale that's made up. No, it's the reconstruction of the history going back thousands and thousands of years. So it's as accurate as it possibly could be. But what I found is that in terms of geography of the origin, it's on point. But then, in African mythology, you'll have, this theme of talking animals and different type of creatures. What I found interesting is like in the biblical accounts, you have this beast with I believe 7 horns and 10 something else. But in this account here, you have a woman who has 7 ears and 3 eyes. And I used to wonder why a lot of our people, were obsessed with like Dracula stories and zombie stories and so forth and so on. And I would say that's white people stuff. But no, most of this stuff comes out of African mythology. There have been great studies that have been done, like a lot of the stories such as animals, that comes out of Africa. And Walt Disney has made trillions of dollars off of African-based stories. I mean, trillions of dollars. And, we don't generally pay people to tell these stories. We just tell them because this is our history, this is our mythology. But when we told it in America, these people, white people, took these stories, put them into writing, made movies off of them, made cartoons off of them. And these are African-based stories. So that whole Dracula concept you have here in this, Contes, initiatiques, Peul, a woman with seven ears, 3 eyes, and she's drinking blood. She's drinking the blood of young men. Also, it's the whole prophetic thing. Again, these shepherd prophet people who tell of the tale of the Injeto Diwal and her coming and how she would destroy the people because of their sins. So this is also, you know, again, the biblical accounts, but in the Fulani mythology, you have that theme, and we always had that type of theme. When the people sin, the country will deteriorate morally, and then there will be a physical destruction of that country. So the country of Heli and Yo-Yo is destroyed because of sin. So this is consistent again with the type of biblical accounts that you come up with. So when you analyze that, you see why a lot of the European scholars say that the Fulbe people are of the Bani Israel, because the mythology is very much similar. So in translating this work, again, you notice certain things about the language. I just want to say a side note. Like for instance, when you do translation work, you notice the redundancy that we use every day. Like for instance, when you say chai, I want a chai tea, and that's French, but in French it would be shay, and shay comes from Arabic. So really you're saying, and shay in Arabic means tea. So you're really saying I want a TT, you know, and you know, things like that. So the root words, when you get down to the root words, you will see that in the English language, why there's so much redundancy, because we use a lot of words to say something simple. When you get into the African language, you could say 3 words, or 2 words, Aduna Lutata, and that means this life is not forever. But I said that in 2 words, and this life is not forever. I would have to say it in English, you know, 4 or 5 words. So you learn a lot of different things about the language and linguistics, and how the African sages don't have to say a lot in order to say a lot. I'm going to say that again. They don't have to say a lot in order to say a lot. They don't have to use a lot of words in order to say a lot. So in translating this work, it's, you know, again, I have a whole lot of respect for Amadou Hampate Ba, because in Pula, he probably could have told this story with half the book. You know, really, like with half the book, because he would not have to have used so many words to describe the concepts in Pula. And let me just say something as I close about the African sage. You know, the concept of the African sage, when you read the story, you see there's humor. Again, you see there's poetry, you see there's prose. And you know, I'm sure there would be like what we would call mimicking, mimicry, and so forth and so on. When you look at, let's say, a Chris Rock, a comedian, in Africa, he would be a sage. You know, he would be a storyteller. He would be a wise man who takes complex truths, put it in a story form, and put it into humor form. Eddie Murphy would be a sage, because not only did Eddie Murphy, do comedy and humor and tell stories and truthful principles in the form of comedy, he also did it singing with his comedic stance, and he also did singing as a separate career. But that is the personality of an African sage. African sage is a poet, he's a singer, he's a comedian, and he's also a wise man, and he's respected and honored as a wise man, even though he's a comedian. Like Paul Mooney, he would be a sage. He would be respected as and honored as a wise man. These comedians are looked down on as, that's just a funny man. But in the telling of African stories, he's more than just a funny man. This man is a sage. He's a wise man. So This is very, very, very interesting when you get into this type of work of bringing it from one language to another. So this is a work in progress that I'm doing. I hope y'all will support it. I hope you will share this video and share the translation work. You can find my translation work on facebook.com/Elijah Shabazz Productions. That's facebook.com/Elijah Shabazz Productions. Right now I have parts 1 through 4, and inshallah, in the not too distant future, I will have parts 5, and hopefully I will complete the whole book. But I would like to know your support. I would like to see your support, I should say. I would like to get a lot of feedback from what you've read and how it's affected you, and share it. By all means, share it. The reason why at first I was doing the translation work just for myself so I could know the history of Fulbe people, but then I thought about the Fulbe in Liberia. A lot of them have lost their language. Sierra Leone. When I went to Guinea, a lot of people, they looked at me, they know I was a Fula, and but when I spoke English, they still didn't think I was from America. They said, oh, he's a Fulani from Sierra Leone or whatever, because they know some of them, they lost their Pula and they speak English. But they didn't think I was American. They thought I was, Sierra Leone or Liberia. So, so I said, let me publish this work and not keep it to myself, because I realized there are a lot of Fulbe who don't read French, and a lot of Fulbe who didn't get a chance to hear this in Pula and don't speak Pula. There are a lot of Fulbe in Nigeria. They speak Hausa and they speak English. So share it with those Fulbe so that they also can have their history in the English language until we produce a book that tells the story in English. So thank you so much, and I look forward to your feedback. Peace.